Raid testing for the Midnight Season 1 raids is now over. 7 of the 9 bosses have been tested on Mythic and Heroic. I'm going to give a summary of every boss and the raid in general. The way the 3 raids are split is that there will initially be a 6 boss raid, the Voidspire, and a 1 boss raid, the Dream Rift. These 7 bosses will get a Heroic week and then a Mythic week, and on Mythic week 2, the 3rd raid, March of quel'danas, will release on all difficulties. The Voidspire is posed as the main raid of the tier and is where every guild will start. The first boss, Imperator Averzian, is a tic-tac-toe boss that is played on a 3x3 grid platform. This boss will summon 3 adds onto 3 different squares in this grid. The tanks must place a raid soak on 2 of these adds to destroy them, and then the 3rd add will permanently place a portal on the board. If the boss gets 3 portals in a row, he will wipe the raid. This is a pretty heavy AoE boss where there is a massive wave of adds about every minute. Now on Mythic, this boss gains a very particular dispel mechanic. Every Voidwalker add that needs to be destroyed has 5 stacks of a shield. Every set of mechanics, there are 10 players that get a dispel that depletes the shield. These 10 players need to be dispelled perfectly split between the 2 adds such that both shields are fully depleted or it will likely result in a full wipe. I must say it does sound quite the requirement for a first boss to mandate 10 dispels done in a perfect split in 17 seconds. I don't think it's as hard as it sounds. The group I was testing with figured it out pretty quickly. Basically the whole raid pre-stacks on one ad, you send out 5 dispels, and then the 5 guys who didn't get dispelled run to the second ad immediately. But it is a bit of a big requirement for a first boss, kind of finicky if you don't have 5 healers, is a pretty big wipe condition if even one person doesn't understand the urgency of the mechanic. Definitely looking like the hardest first boss I've ever seen on testing. Wouldn't be surprised if it got changed. The second boss is Vorasius. He's another big guy in the ground type of boss. This is a fight with a lot of area denial and dodging. He will constantly send out a tank soak every few seconds that gives a damage taken debuff and requires quite good defensive layering for tanks to live it. The soak will then send out circles to be dodged, much like Kurog or Nexus King. At the end of a phase, the boss will spawn some worms that fixate on players. These players must kite the worms to a wall, and then the worms must be killed on that wall to destroy the wall. At some point, the boss will cast a massive beam sweeping through the arena, and if both walls are not broken, the raid will have nowhere to go and die to it. While the boss is simple, it did feel quite finicky on Mythic. The 6 worms must be kited in a perfect split of 3 on either side to break the walls. The worms couldn't be killed too early because it wouldn't be near the wall, but the worms also had to be killed staggered because they do AoE raid damage when they die. On top of that, there are just a bunch of swirlies going on at the same time as you have to kill the worms, a lot of area denial. The third boss is Salhadaar again. The main mechanic of this boss is that he summons 2 orbs from 2 edges of the room, and these orbs must be killed before they reach him or it is a wipe. While this is happening, he summons clones of himself that are casting and disappear after they are kicked. There is some area denial with a dispel that leaves a puddle and a pentagonal spike mechanic, and there is a brief intermission where you rotate around the boss with beams. On Mythic, there are a few extra tiny orbs to kill, and the clones had a stacked shield, which meant you had to kick each clone sequentially, which will remove the shield off one other clone. I think the clone mechanic did make nameplates feel a bit cluttered, and there wasn't really enough time to execute all of these kicks without a Weakauras. The fourth boss is Vaelgor Ezzorak. This boss is 2 void dragons. They have to be tanked 15 yards away from each other, although this was a bit bugged in testing, and they also have to be kept within 10% health of each other or they will enrage. Every 40 seconds or so, there will be a mass AoE adds spawned on player positions. These have to be spawned spread, but can be CC'd and mass gripped. The darker dragon casts a tether that needs to be broken, while the lighter dragon sends out an orb that needs to be soaked a number of times to reduce its impact upon touching the edge. This boss has an intermission where both dragons fly around in the sky, while an ad spawns in the middle that puts circles on players and hits the tank. And of course, each dragon has a tail swipe. This boss is quite similar in Mythic. There are just some swirlies when a tether is broken, the orb soaks need to be staggered, and there are more mechanics in the intermission. The fifth boss is Lightblinded Vanguard. This is just Soul Hunters, except it's 3 paladins, 1 of each spec. These bosses will cast standard paladin abilities like Avenger Shield or Divine Storm. Every so often, one of them will cast an aura, which is a massive AoE circle the other 2 bosses need to be dragged out of. While casting an aura, the paladin in question will use their ultimate. The Protection Paladin ultimate is a Divine Toll, which is a bunch of shields to dodge that silence you if hit. The Ret Paladin ultimate is Execution Sentence, which is 4 soaks that send out rotating hammers like a second boss of priority. And the Holy Paladin ultimate is Tear's Wrath, which is a massive stacking health absorb on the closest players. After each aura, the boss will drop a concentration on the location of that aura, causing permanent area denial. And they brought back a mechanic from Jaina here. When you press Lust, 2 of the 3 paladins will use Divine Shield, becoming immune. This can be mass dispelled though. The main mythic change is very simple. 2 paladins will cast an ultimate at once each time. The 6th boss was not tested. It is called Crown of the Cosmos, and it seems that we will be fighting Illyria in some way. Interesting thing to note is that its mythic journal is like Gallywix in that it is completely missing everything other than phase 1, so it will likely be a redesigned fight in Mythic compared to Heroic. The Dream Rift raid features 1 boss called Chimaerus the Undreamt God. This boss's loot bracket is 2 out of 6 Mythic, which would put it at the same level as the 2nd and 3rd boss in Voidspire, or compared to Live, the same bracket as Soulbinder and Lumathar. It is likely this boss will be tuned such that it is pulled as the 4th boss in the raid tier. This boss features 2 two-phased realms. Half the raid will enter a soak, which will take them to the on-site realm, in which they have to break the shields on some adds. When these shields are broken, the adds emerge in the ordinary realm, where the other half of the raid have to kill them before they reach the boss. After 2 sets of these soaks, the boss will enter an intermission where he flies up and breathes over the battlefield, summoning some more adds that need to be killed. On Mythic, players from opposing phases cannot touch or they will take a lot of damage, and also 2 players from the on-site realm will be chosen and need to be soaked by players from the ordinary realm. In the March of quel'danas raid, which releases a week after the other raids, the first boss is Belo'ren. At the start of this encounter, every player is given a blue or yellow debuff that gives you a large damage reduction when touching mechanics of your respective color. Throughout the fight, every mechanic is either yellow or blue. There are yellow and blue soaks, there is a yellow or blue line that has to be intercepted by a player of that color, and there are yellow and blue orbs that fly in a line, and a gap needs to be made by players of that color. This boss does not have much health because it is a phoenix, and when you kill it, it will return to its egg in the center of the room, which is like a burn phase. The egg retains health per phase, and the boss dies when the egg dies. On Mythic, the orbs spawn in more irregular patterns and will explode if they hit the boss, and then the line soaks will do AoE damage. The second boss of March of quel'danas raid is Midnight Falls, which is considered to be the end boss of the tier. This boss was not available for testing, but Blizzard accidentally left the door open on heroic testing and some guilds got to pull it once in C Phase 1. This was posted on Wowhead, so it's pretty much common knowledge now. The boss starts with a shield and rotating adds around it, then emits a few symbols which act as a memory game. 4 players will have those symbols above their heads and must arrange themselves in the order that they were given. The boss then has an intermission where 1 player has to stand in each corner of the room, but no guilds knew that and we don't have footage past this. The loot structure in the raid is pretty standard. There is tier dropped off boss 2 to 5 in Voidspire and the boss in Dreamrift. The tier in this expansion has gone away from the Mystic Venerated Zenith Dreadful system and is now purely based on armor type. For example, this Voidcast tier token is for Hunter, Shaman, and Evoker, who are all male users. Because the tier Curo drops off the March of quel'danas end boss, we won't actually have tier Curos until the second week of Mythic, but because there is a heroic week, it should be reasonably easier to fill out tier on an entire guild, although some people could get completely unlucky. There is only 1 cantrip weapon in the entire raid. It is a Warglaive from Midnight Falls that is a damage proc. And there are 2 very rare items. One is a neck from the Voidspire end boss that procs damage when you deal shadow damage, and one is a full haste ring from the March of quel'danas end boss that procs a shield when you take cosmic damage. It's a bit early to talk about trinkets because the tuning is not in. Some are really OP and some are really bad right now. Also, I don't think they have announced anything about a raid renown track for this tier, but at the entrance of instances there is an NPC with a 28-day progress bar that could potentially just be granting a 3% buff at the end of this 28-day period. This tier has a mythic mount of the Midnight Falls end boss that resembles the Belo'ren boss, a light and void phoenix. It also has gold trophies for housing decor. The glowing variant of these trophies might be from each cutting edge achievement, although they do show up in the loot tables on heroic. Now I wanted to give some thoughts on how the raid felt. With the Midnight expansion, there has been a lot of controversy about simplification. It has been a common theory that the raid would be made very easy to accommodate for the removal of computational Weakauras, and I do not think that this is the case. The first 2 bosses in this raid testing were probably the hardest first 2 bosses I've ever tested. They required actual coordination and raid leading. I don't think they look exceptionally hard, but they are definitely actual bosses compared to something like Soulbinder and Menaforge, who was a very easy boss in testing and came out as a very easy boss on live. Also, there are kind of more mythic mechanics on the first boss than any other boss. I don't think this is necessarily an issue, but I wouldn't be surprised if they changed something about this. The middle bosses felt like the standard difficulty of middle bosses. Depending on tuning, they could be anywhere from 10 pulls to 100 pulls, and of course I can't speak on the end bosses because you haven't really seen them. One thing to note in this raid is there is no pure single target boss. This will be the first tier since Battle for Dazar'alor without any boss that has no adds. In my opinion, this is a bit of a mistake, and it's good to just have one boss where you're doing your pure single target rotation, especially when majority of theory crafting and dummy training is done around pure single target. I feel like the second boss should probably be reworked to a patchwork boss. Now in this period of testing, the raid damage was very high and healers seemed like they were kind of struggling, so you would have seen a lot of deaths to ticking out, but that is just a tuning thing and will likely feel different on release. Now the question is, did removing Weakauras influence the design of this raid? I think it definitely did a bit. The first boss Mythic Dispels is something that would be covered by a Weakaura, where each healer would have a glowing raid frame and each dispel would be assigned to a different bubble. The second boss Worms would be assigned a left or right wall to go to. The Salhadaar clones would have a highlighted nameplate assigning a kick to each clone. And Belo'ren will probably have a constant reminder telling you to soak blue or soak yellow. Not every boss has some kind of assignment thing like this, and they have developed some logic to make things easier, such as the 4 soaks on the Paladins boss only going on healers for the ease of assignment. And I will just say I'm not surprised Blizzard is going so hard on Weakauras considering the workarounds some people have found on live. Did you know that there was a Fractalist Weakaura that accurately tracks everyone's position in the raid based off hidden environment casts and calls out every single mistake? And then there is the slightly too early question of what classes will be good in this raid. Now of course a lot of the time the answer will be it doesn't matter yet, there is a lot of tuning to come, but I do think you can look at themes and timings in the raid to get an idea. For example, Narubar theme was heavy burst AoE, Undermine theme was spread cleave, Manaforge theme was damage amps. I think the theme for this raid again seems to be spread cleave. Second and third boss have a lot of adds where something like a Destro Lock or Shadow Priest would be very strong at. The double dragons boss is a spread 2 target boss and it also frequently spawns mass spread AoE orbs, possibly good for a boomy, or maybe you would just play double blood decay to grip every set. The paladins boss has one paladin regularly out of the group casting an aura, and the Dreamwolf boss has adds that need to be killed before they reach the boss. Also, because Hunter's Mark is a 3% flat damage buff on a target now, it is entirely possible you would want 2 hunters on the dragon boss and 3 hunters on the paladin boss. But of course everything depends on tuning in the end, and sometimes we think things are important in testing and they actually are not. All in all, I think the raid is looking alright, looking not too easy, and is mostly designed in concordance with Blizzard's new philosophies. I do think the earlier bosses could possibly be a bit finicky and mythic for their position in the raid, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some changes and maybe redesigns or retested bosses later in the beta cycle.